and we certainly encourage you to use it as you already are. We'll have about 10 minutes of questions at the end. Now, we got a lot of people. I think about 150 people signed up for this initial event, which is pretty good turnout here. So we may not be able to get to all of your questions, but want to encourage you to, at a very bare minimum, pour yourself a glass of wine. We'll save for a toast at the end, and hope you'll enjoy a conversation we've been looking forward to now for many, many months. Now, this is the first in a 6-part series celebrating Knudsen Vineyards' 50th anniversary in the Willamette Valley. It's a series that will reflect on the past and the insights for the future. And today, joining me are Paige Knudsen Cowles, the managing partner at Knudsen Vineyards, and a man who really needs no introduction, Mr. Dick Erath, the founder of Erath Winery. Dick is obviously one of the true pioneers of the Oregon wine industry, very successful wine entrepreneur, one of the most recognized names in Oregon wine. And Dick was a longtime business partner of Paige's late father, Cal Knudsen, who purchased a promising hillside way back in 1971. And Paige and her 3 brothers are now the second generation to farm this storied vineyard, which bore the legacy of that partnership for so many years as the Knudsen Erath Winery. And Paige, I want to thank you for being here. I know you've poured your heart and soul into this over the past few months. And Dick, it's been great getting to know you. And thank you both for taking time to join us today. Paige?
Well, thank you, Brian. I am really excited to be here with someone who played such an important role in the establishment of our vineyard. So Dick, thank you very much for being here.
Well, let's kick this series off where the story all began with Dick Erath. Before we talk about that, I have to ask you, Dick, why did you settle in Oregon? There were so many places you could have planted vineyards and settled. What was it about Oregon and winemaking in the Willamette Valley that drew you here?
That's a loaded question, Brian, but I'll give you the best answer I can. At the time, I was an engineer in the Bay Area, electronics, and I got interested in making wine as an amateur. And I started making a barrel of wine in 1965 in my garage there. I had met Barney Fetzer, who at that time had not yet even established a winery, and he was selling grapes to home winemakers. And he wanted to have a brochure, and so I was in photography a lot back in those days. I had studied with Ansel Adams, and so I did photography, and instead of charging him money, he paid me off in grapes. So I started making wine in the garage in back in those days, and the more I looked into it, I felt that most of the Oregon, I should say the California climate was too warm for Pinot Noir, which begs the question, why did I go chasing after that elusive grape in the first place? Well, it turns out I had a good friend who was an attorney lived in San Francisco, and we were over for dinner one night and had a bottle of 1955 Inglenook Pinot Noir that Andrei Chelichev had made. And it's just a dynamite bottle of wine. And I said, this is what wine should be about. And so I looked into what are the growing conditions that you need. And you need the cool growing areas for Pinot. And there are some in California, but at the time I had 2 small children, and the places that were available were the Anderson Valley, which was basically no man's land. And I would have had to be a Motorola TV repairman to make a living there. The other place that I looked at was the Santa Cruz Mountains, which was close enough to Silicon Valley, but the ground there was very expensive and there wasn't much of it. It was mostly rock. So that didn't look very promising. So then I took a class at Davis. I started saying, I got to learn more about this winemaking and grape growing stuff. And one of the professors, I asked him about what's going on up in Oregon, because it seemed to me that that's a much cooler situation, having lived in Seattle when I was a kid for a couple of years. And I'd been to Europe also, and it seemed to me that the climate in Oregon was much more, close to that of Europe, Germany and France. And so I asked about Oregon, and he said, well, I had a couple fellows go through my class here last year, one was Dave Lett from Ivory Vineyard, another one was Chuck Corey from his vineyard. And I got their contact information, but he said, you don't have to go that far. There's a fellow in the back of the class here is from Roseburg, Oregon, and it was Richard Summers, who was actually planted the first vineyards in Oregon in 1961. And he was very happy to meet somebody that had an interest in Oregon, because back then you could count the number of people on one hand that wanted to do something in Oregon with grapes. So he gave me a bottle of wine, and I couldn't wait to get home with it. And I got home and opened it up and then poured it in a glass, and it smelled like whiskey barrels.
Oh.
And turns out that he was on a very shoestring budget, and he purchased. I don't even know if he got to pay anything for him, because back then you could only use a whiskey barrel once. And at Hood River Distilleries, he would pick up the whiskey barrels, take them back to Roseburg, and put wine in them, and he didn't bother rinsing them out. He got a very strong whiskey flavor in the wines, but behind and all through that, you could taste there was some really nice fruit character there. And so one thing led to another, and then Tectonics had offered me a job, and I went up for an interview in 1967. And after the interview, actually during the interview, I met Chuck Corey. He was living in a farmhouse where the vineyard is out in Forest Grove. The farmhouse was pretty bad shape. They'd been abandoned, and someone had cut like a 10-foot hole in the main floor and used it for a potato cellar. And he managed to, scratch it together so he could live in it. And I remember sitting in there at night and talking wine and grapes and hearing the rats scurrying around. And so, but he was inspirational too, because he'd come back from Alsace after having a sabbatical there. He had done his master's thesis at Davis about basically why cool weather works, and all the different aspects of the light and heat and solar radiation, the whole pretty extensive paper. And he was highly critical of the California system, which didn't go over very well with his professors, I don't think. So, but he was conferred. He did get a master's degree conferred on about a year after, and he came back to Oregon and continued his planning up at Forest Grove. I went to see Dave Lett, and he was a book salesman at the time, but his wife they were living in Silverton, Oregon. And I spoke with her, and then didn't meet Dave until after we moved up. And that's sort of how I got into it. And there's not much more to say. I mean, those are the highlights of the whole thing.
Well, I remember meeting you, Dick, in 1972, when our father engaged you to help develop Knudsen Vineyards. And with your oversight, our family got together and planted the first rows. And my brothers, of which I have 3, worked on the vineyard in the summer, and they remember an old house that they would sleep in with the bats. And when they didn't wake up or were late to work, you would throw dirt clods on the side of the house to get them out of bed. I think it was quite effective. And then I worked summers with some women that you had hired in the early days, in those early 70s, whose kids were in school. And it was good timing because they had the days free while their kids were in school. So that was wonderful to be there during the summers. I'd love to ask you though, Dick, how you came to meet my father, Cal Knudsen.
I met Cal through the Oregon Economic Development Commission. There was a fellow working for that commission. His name was Jack Potticary. I think he's still doing a similar kind of thing, but last I heard he was in New Mexico. And he had somehow found out there were 4 of us back then had planted grapes. Chuck Corey, Dave Lett, myself, and Richard Summers. So he interviewed all 4 of us and wrote a paper and sent the paper out. Came across your dad's desk, and when your dad at the time was working for Weyerhaeuser as I think he was in charge of real estate acquisitions. And so he called, he sent a letter out to all of us asking if we would consider selling him some grapes when we went from our vineyards. And I don't know what everyone else said, but I said, I'm going to need the grapes myself for my own winery. And I think he also at that time got some response from Dave Lett, and actually Dave Lett had found a piece of property for him in the Dundee Hills, and they were ready to sign the documents to buy the property. And the seller said, what are you going to do with this? And he said, well, we're going to put in a vineyard. And the fellow said, I'm not going to sell it. He was alcohol was against his religion or whatever. So then that led to the purchase of the existing property, which came from, I think some lumber family had owned it before your dad bought it.
Mm-hmm. We were told it was a former walnut orchard, so I don't know if that's.
It was former, like my place was too, because the Columbus Day storm came when the walnut trees still had their leaves on them, and it just lifted and it broke off the walnut trees and broke off the taproot, which basically killed the tree. Mm-hmm. Smaller trees like Jim Marsh had a prune orchard. He said he could look out his window and see the prune trees dancing across the ground. They would be uprooted and being blown around. It was 100-mile-an-hour wind. I mean,
at least, yeah. You know, Cal, my dad shared your certainty that the Willamette Valley was going to be a great place for cool climate grapes, and he had big plans to develop Knudsen Vineyards rapidly. But as you know, there was no playbook for how to do that. You had to make a lot of decisions about row spacing, vine spacing, trellising, clones, pruning, to name just a few. But even so, you and your team planted 31 acres in 1972 on our vineyard, and another 34 2 years after that. So you had all that going on, but you had your own vineyard. How did you actually keep up with it all?
It was a struggle, and your dad and I shared equipment together, and the commute wasn't that bad. It's about 2 miles, 3 miles to the north on off of Dopp Road. I was I had purchased the property from Mrs. Dopp. It was the first time there was a sale of that property. It was homesteaded prior to that, and paid $500 an acre, and I thought that was very expensive. Substantially more now.
Yes, sir. Yes, it is. And you know, you and Dad decided to plant a lot of acreage at one time on our vineyard. What was that decision-making process? Because a lot was really unproven at that time. Was it just his vision that it was going to be a great place, or did you encourage him, or did he say, just go do it?
Well, I think we both were very optimistic about what Oregon could do, and that slope, and is probably the largest single slope in the Dundee Hills that's suitable, has a suitable exposure, contiguous. And so we know we needed, we wanted to do something that had scale, and we bought in 1971, we bought in truckloads of grapevines from Southern California that had been mispropagated. So they were green growing grapevines in little 4-inch square pots. It's something like you put in your windowsill in your house, it's kind of small. And we had cleared the ground and gotten it ready to plant. And we planted it. And for the first thing that happened, they didn't come on time. They came in July instead of the beginning of, they had come in May or something. It wouldn't have been so bad, but they came in July when things get pretty dry in Oregon at that time. So we spent day after day watering them just to get them established because they were so tiny. And then the other thing that I recall, we had cutworms that came up out of the ground at night and started chewing on the vines. You don't see them in the daytime. So we had to deal with those vine by vine with a little hand sprayer going around each base of each vine to get rid of the cutworms. So, and then the watering was continuous. I had a couple of kids that they would come after school, and on weekends they would just continue to, one water tank was being filled up, they'd be out watering with the other one, and rotation out like that. And water was an issue back then because there were no wells, there was just a spring, and we had collected water in tanks and things, and what we didn't have a well drilled until 1985 was the first well. So it was challenging, but
yes, pretty bootstrap, I'd say.
And then the spacing and training was, I think, all of us, we had the Davis education about viticulture, and so we had the California fingerprint put on us about how you grow grapes. And in California, they have what's called the California sprawl, which is just one high wire, and all the shoots draped down, look like a upside, looks like a dress hanging down, and it shades the fruit because they have sunburn issues. Well, it's the opposite in Oregon. We want to expose the fruit and get the canopy in a vertical situation. And so in 1977, I'd spent 6 weeks in Europe, going from France to Germany to Alsace, and looking at how people were doing things, and saw that we really had to have a method of training the vines in a more vertical position. And I brought back with me the concept of the movable catch wires, which everyone uses now, which is which really makes things a lot easier in the vineyard.
Well, Dick, the comments are rolling in, and people love hearing these stories from back in the early days. And if you go back to 1972, you had the first winery in the Dundee Hills, and you started Erath Winery in the basement of what is now the Knudsen tasting room. And I know we're all wondering, what did you make at the outset?
Well, there was a total of 212 cases made that year. And it was 90 cases of Pinot, and a similar number of Riesling and a smaller number of Gewürztraminer, and that's the only 3 wines we had. And Brian was sort of comical when I finally got the wine bottled in 73, and I started to sell it. I would go to wine shops in Portland, and I remember one wine shop in Lake Oswego, and the man said to me, the owner, he said, and I told him I had some, Oregon wine, and he said, "Well, Sonny, what kind of fruit and berries do you use?" So I said, I had that's what everyone thought back in those days. That, fruit and berry wines were more prevalent than grape wines back then. Big turnaround.
Yeah. Well, a few years later, after that, 1975, you and Cal founded the Knudsen Erath partnership and built Knudsen Erath Winery in 1976. So that kind of paralleled your trip over to Alsace, and that time frame, it sounds like, and you became the first commercial winery in the Dundee Hills. Were you starting to maybe trend toward Pinot Noir at that point after that trip to France?
For sure. When I went, the defining moment for me was when I was in Burgundy and tasting wine, and we would go in. We were with a negotiant that was buying wines to ship back to the United States. But back then, the smaller producer had difficulty accessing the American market, and she established a company along with a fellow by the name of Phil Diamond called Diamond Wine Merchants. Maybe it was 1984 or so that we actually started selling more wine out of state than we did in state.
Wow.
And
Well, as you know, Dick, my father loved sparkling wine, and I think you and he had a number of conversations about that. He was fascinated by sparkling wine production, and as a result, the Knudsen family are kind of sparkling wine nuts as well. On a personal note, you will remember when I was married in 1984, we served something called Oregon Brut, which was made from Knudsen Vineyards. Tell us a little bit about that sparkling wine production.
well, we made the cuvee, we did what's called the Solera system. Started making the cuvee in 1981, and then would take out so much wine and replace it with 82, and would take out some of that and replace it. I don't think we ever replaced it with 83. It was just 2 vintages in there. And so the brut was a combination of 81 and 82 base wine. And it was basically 2/3 Pinot Noir and 1/3 Chardonnay. We had to press it off whole. You have to be very careful pressing it off. And it was a difficult thing to do because to get consistency with sparkling wine, I think you have to be at least 10,000 cases so you can get automated equipment. So everything is done the same. Every bottle is treated the same. I remember back in those days, after we put the wines in the tirage where they're bottle fermented, we went through the tirage bins and just randomly sampled bottles out of there, and they were like, we could taste 9 different wines from theoretically one wine, right?
Right.
There were 9 different manifestations of that wine. And because of this issue of just slightly different fill levels and different yeast intensities, and that it was difficult. So we basically stopped doing it. But
No,
I haven't lost my love for it. I didn't make it last year. I didn't 2018. I made still a barrel of sparkling wine.
Oh, great.
And
Wonderful. Yeah, well, we love it. And I remember being very cheeky with my father before my wedding saying, well, okay, Dad, if you want to serve it, it's fine, but it better be good, What an ingrate. So I have another rather personal question. How did Dad influence you and your life and your career?
well, I think we were a great fit because I had the technical side, the wine growing and grape growing, and he had the business side. And I learned so much about business practices from him and how to run a business. And basically, I really appreciated that time and what I learned by working with him.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's nice to hear. That's great.
He's a great mentor,
Oh, lovely. Thank you for that. That's lovely for you to say.
Hey, Dick, while we have time here, the industry, it has to be, I mean, how do you even put into words the last 50 years, right? Since we're celebrating the anniversary of Knudsen, this rapid development, really, in terms of not only Knudsen, but the industry, the scale, all the trial and error you talk about, and maybe talk about the influence or the impact of the development of the Dundee Hills on the overall wine industry of Oregon. I mean, it really has become certainly the flagship for Oregon. We're seeing Chardonnay now and other varietals, but you reflect back on this. I mean, you just have to kind of pinch yourself, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. I think looking back, Brian, we never thought we'd fail. I mean, I think that was a mindset. We never thought we would fail, but we never thought we'd be this successful. It's been a major success building this industry. I don't know what the value is these days, but it's substantial. And the other thing, I was taking a look, and we're now, the Willamette Valley now has more acreage planted to wine grapes than Napa has. So Napa's only, California is huge, 600,000 acres of grapes, but most of those are in the valleys, the huge valleys. So Napa's about 40 acres and Sonoma Valley is about 60. So the combined 100 acres there, and I think we're somewhere, don't know the exact numbers, but we're eclipsing that here in Oregon now, and we have a lot more room. It's a huge valley, so there's many more acres that could be planted. I think that from that perspective, there's a lot of room to grow, and I think some of the Californians are moving up now, and of course the French moved a long time ago because they recognized the Burgundians recognized this is the right place to plant Pinot, because I remember talking with Robert Duran, and he said, you know, I don't have to worry about hail at harvest time. It's a big problem in Burgundy.
Mm-hmm. You know, Dick, you've been so gracious, and we are also appreciative for your time. Can you just develop a little bit further what you're thinking about the future of Oregon wine industry and the Dundee Hills specifically?
Well, I think it's certainly there's room to grow, and I think that I don't know if there's a formula, but it seems like we're not going to be like Bordeaux, which is a lot of big producers, and we're more like Burgundy with a lot of small producers and a few big houses, negociants. So that model is more in place than any other model. I guess the issue that I would think is, from a land use perspective, to protect the land that is suitable for vineyards, so that developments don't take over. And there are a lot of land use measures that have passed in Oregon that protect the land. Then the other issue is how to control or manage the visitations to all the tasting rooms. And I know it's now in Napa Valley, they've had to stop. You can have a winery in Napa Valley, but you can't have a tasting room with it because there's too much traffic on Highway 29. Mm. You have to be careful. I mean, how this keeps spreading out. You know, more and more acreage gets in, and more people produce wine. You don't want to legislate that kind of thing. You want, you know, we're not a kind of country that legislates that. So, good question.
Hey, Dick, I know people. It's been a few years maybe since they've seen you. What are you up to now? I know you're still busy doing a lot of stuff. Maybe bring us up to speed after the retirement from the winery. And I know you're still very involved in the industry. Maybe tell us what you're up to.
Well, I'm always talking with people in the industry in Oregon. And when we moved to Vancouver, I discovered there's a small industry here in Clark County, and really small. It reminds me of Oregon like 30 years ago, and little mom and pop operations. There's a few substantial producers, but most everyone's kind of small. And they haven't even figured out an AVA for this area. What are we going to call ourselves here? So they're still debating that. They're going through the growing pains here. So I'm on that. I'm a member of the Southwest Wineries Association, and right now we're meeting virtually, and I'm getting another note. Just brought me another note. And when I sold the winery back in 2006 to San Michelle, I kept the vineyards. Mm-hmm. But I took some of the money from the sale and started a foundation. And so the foundation has given back over $1 million to the industry through grant proposals. And we've done things like bought the Salute people a new medical van, and we built a teaching lab in Jamaica and Salem. So it's been a lot of fun to be able to give back to the industry.
Well, we have time for a few questions, and boy, I'll tell you, somebody who knows this inside and out, Steve, and his question here was, you scroll back up there. I'm trying to find it. There was a question about here it is, the shingle buildings below the outlook with the moss. Were those original buildings back from the walnut farm, or do you recall?
Where are the buildings again?
They were
below the outlook with the moss.
I think what he's talking about is down by the winery, the garage and the what's now a machine shed.
Oh, wow. Those were built in 76.
Okay.
So we started, the first few vintages were in the basement of the house. I built the basement it's a panboat house, and came in as a kit. And so with there was a freedom of how to use the space in the basement, and I made the doors big enough to roll barrels through, and so that actually made wine for 272, so for 3 years in the basement of the house, and then pretty soon tanks were starting to get squeezed out onto the parking lot, and so in 1975, Cal and I decided we needed a much bigger space because more and more grapes were coming in, and then we built the first winery building down below, which was a Butler steel building that we converted to a winery. And then in 76, we built the south part of the building. Actually, we called it the tank room, and it had the cupola on the top, and actually was designed to be a winery. So it was like a hermit crab, always looking for a bigger shell to climb into.
That's a great way to put it.
Philip Higgins is asking you about Coastal Mist and Pacific Mist. How did these wildly popular wines come into being?
Well, Brian, back in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s, Oregon wine was still being produced in the quantities that we had a lot of support from the Oregon consumers, but they couldn't drink as much as we were making. So we went to a more, we call them, the Coastal Mist came out of a 1984 vintage, which was a vintage from hell because it was rained so much that we couldn't make any decent Pinot that year. Yeah, it was very difficult. So we made a rosé, and we used a Riesling Sweet Reserve into the rosé and called it Coastal Mist, and it became Oregon hot tub wine. And, and it was very popular, but the margins in it were very small. We didn't make a lot of money with that wine. And the Pacific Mist was a similar situation. And finally, after about a 10-year run, I think we phased them out.
Last question here before we wrap up. And this is maybe more toward the future of Oregon wine and what we've seen with Chardonnay over the past few years and how well it's showing not only in our backyard, but all around the world. What are your thoughts about Chardonnay in the Willamette Valley? And can this Oregon Chardonnay, I guess, compete or stack up with those Chardonnays from around the world?
That's an interesting observation because Brian, when we first started planting Chardonnay, we were stuck. We had a agricultural situation in Oregon that we would only plant material that was free of disease, because diseases in grapevines tend to interfere with the ripening process and the yields too. So the only what we call a clean clone of Chardonnay came from selections that were made in the Napa Valley, and they produced very large clusters and were very difficult to ripen. And so early on, the Chardonnays were showing that peculiarity or that characteristic. And it wasn't until later, until the 80s, we got what we called the Dijon clones of Chardonnay that we got from France that are really making great Chardonnay. And now I think what's going on in Oregon, we're playing catch-up ball to get the Chardonnays to come along to the same level of interest as the Pinot, because Pinot is by far still the #1 variety in Willamette Valley.
That is indeed the fact, and it's going to be interesting to see where it goes from here. Well, we've gone over about 10 minutes here, and I know nobody's complaining about that, but Dick, we promised you 30 minutes, and I want to stick to that as close as possible. I want to thank you so much for joining us, Paige. Also, we appreciate you sharing your inspirational stories today. And this, as we mentioned, is the first of 6 of these in this series to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Knudsen Vineyards. And you might remember earlier we were talking about sparkling wine, and the Knudsens love that sparkling wine. Well, next time we're going to bring in a man who is largely responsible for making sparkling in Oregon possible and one of the most respected sparkling winemakers in the hemisphere. That's Mr. Rollins Souls from Rocco Wines, of course, made a name for himself at Argyle. He joins us next time on the Knudsen 50th anniversary series. So mark your calendars for Tuesday, April 13th, just over a month from now. Register for the event on the Knudsen Vineyards website, knudsenvineyards.com. I want to thank all of you for joining us and sharing your evening with us, folks. We hope you're staying safe and healthy, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Again, thanks to you, Dick. Thanks to you, Paige, and thanks to everyone for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See you
Thank
next
you,
time,
Brian.
everybody. Thank you so much, Dick. It's been a great pleasure.
All right. Same here.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Bye.